Good evening and welcome again to Life Groups. I wanted to give you a brief recap of my sermon this morning and help you through, introduce some of the questions for tonight. So this morning the message was entitled Unleashed by the Holy Spirit, and we looked at Acts chapter 2 verses 1 through 13 and the initial outpouring of the Holy Spirit on the 120 disciples as they gathered. This is a monumental event in Christian history. This is the age of the Spirit that we're still currently living in. And the main point I wanted everyone to grasp is that the Spirit's work hasn't changed. His power hasn't changed. He's poured out on us in the very same way. And that compelled the early church to be Christ proclaimers. That was what defined them. They turned the world upside down with the message of Jesus. And we're called to do the very same thing. We have the same resources and the same call. So that should cause us to ask some really tough questions about how we go about living our lives. We looked at 5 reasons why this passage compels us to live this way. The first is that the Spirit has come. The Spirit is here. The Spirit that was poured out in Acts has been poured out on us and on every single believer that believes in Jesus. The Spirit indwells us. And He calls us to go. He calls us to take a part in what He's doing already. It's our lack of willingness, our lack of faith that really prevents that. Number 2 was we looked at the fact that His presence is personal. The Spirit was poured out not just as one Spirit, but individually. He divided Himself among every believer, and He does so today. So it is our responsibility to take part in what He's doing, to commune with Him, and to discuss with other believers, what does this look like to have a relationship with God that lives inside of us. The fire, the wind that came, that was representative of God's presence, lives inside of us. How do we connect with that? How do we allow Him to fill us up in the same way? Just kind of open that question up. And then number 3, His power is unpredictable. Nobody could have predicted that God was going to pour Himself out in this way, was going to open their mouths to speak in other tongues. He may not pour Himself out in the same way to us, but what might He do if we had the faith to trust Him, if we let Him surprise us, if we simply did what He called us to do and we expected God to show up in a compelling way? I believe that He would. I believe that in my own life, I think too much of what I can't do rather than what the Spirit could do if I were to simply take God at His word and with a simple reading of the text, just walk in obedience. Number 4 was that the need is global. So we saw that it was an international community that the gospel initially was poured out on here. And so it was multilingual and it was multicultural, and that's how the church is supposed to look today. So we should seek to reach out to people specifically that are different from us, that God's gospel might be displayed most beautifully among people that have nothing in common other than the gospel. And we should seek for our church to reflect this as much as we can. And make sure that we're reaching out to people in our community who are vastly different from us. And number 5, we looked at how the results are not in our hands. We cannot control how people are going to respond. We can only control what we say. We can only control the fact that we can take God at His word, we can share the gospel, but the results are up to Him. Even when the Spirit or Jesus, for example, presented flawlessly, people still turned away. And so people are going to turn away from our message. And that should not cause us to have a sense of failure, because those results are in God's hands. So the pressure's off, and we're simply freed to participate in the Spirit's work. So in light of those things, here's some of the questions, need a little bit of context. So the first one is to think about this idea of the blank page that I opened with. So remember that a blank page, what I meant was, what if we brought nothing to the text? What if we were able to remove our fears and our inhibitions, our presuppositions, the different things culturally that we've kind of been set in a mold? What if we could get all of that out of the way and we just read the Bible like a child and then responded simply? What changes might we make? There's a question, what can you attribute to the power of the Holy Spirit? What would you point to and say, that's got God's fingerprints all over it? That's a miracle in some sense. There's no natural explanation for that. So a lot of things I think if we would be careful to investigate, we would see God's fingerprints in our lives. So give some examples of that. Talk about what it means to be filled with the Holy Spirit. A really interesting idea that I don't have all the answers to. Had a few ideas, like the fact that it's not so much that we need to be filled so much as we need to empty ourselves and participate with the Spirit, give more of ourselves to the Spirit. There's one idea, but if someone asked you, what does it mean to be filled with the Spirit? What would you say? What has historically even been your understanding of this? So I hope this leads to some good discussion. I hope you guys have some great relationship building and just iron on iron sharpening time tonight. And I look forward to seeing you all again soon.